In this section, what we're going to do is create a feature branch. Now we've done feature branches before, but the difference here is that we're going to integrate it with our remote repository. And along the way, we're going to look at how we integrate features that have been added to the develop branch in with our new feature branch. The reason for pulling these changes in might be that there are some bug fixes that have been made along the develop branch, or there are some other features that we need to pull in order to accurately test our feature before we push it back into the develop branch. So let's go ahead and start out by creating our branch. What we're going to do is add a module called persons from the build a module resource pack. So we'll do a git checkout, and then we'll pass it the b parameter in order to create a branch, and we'll call it feature persons. And I'm going to hit enter, and it created, and we switched over to the new branch. Now let's go ahead and copy over the code and add it to this branch. So I'm in the resource pack directory. I'm just going to copy over the persons folder, and then I'm going to paste it into our development site. Just be sure if you're following along to switch over to the development site folder, and then we'll go ahead and paste it in sites, all modules, custom. Okay, now let's jump back to the command line. Let's do a git status to make sure that the only change that's been made is this persons module. Okay, now let's go ahead and add it. I'm going to copy the path, and then I'm going to do git add, and then the path to the directory. Now if we do a git status, we see all of these files have been added to the staging area. So let's go ahead and commit it now with git commit, and then we'll pass it the message added persons module. Okay, so now we've committed our code. So let's say we want to share this code with other team members. We'll go ahead and push it then to the remote central repository with Git Push, and then we need to push this branch, and we'll do so by specifying the name of the remote, which is origin, and then our local branch, which is features persons. And then I'm going to hit enter. Now this pushes up all the code and adds some tracking so we can continue to push to this branch. Okay, so now let's say that Gary, one of our team members, makes a change to the development branch or the develop branch, and we want to pull in those changes. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and make that change to the develop branch from Gary's account, and then go through the process of pulling in those changes to our new branch. So I'm going to switch over to Gary's command line here, and let's go ahead and start by making sure we're on the develop branch with git checkout develop. Now before we ran this command, the develop branch didn't exist in Gary's repository yet. So what happened when we did this, when we did checkout, is it checked our remotes to see if there were any remote branches that were called develop, and then it automatically created our branch and set it to track the remote branch. And then just like a normal git checkout, it switched over to that branch. So at this point, we should be able to push up revisions to our remote version of develop. So let's go ahead and make a modification and commit it as the change that we're eventually going to pull into our new feature branch. I'm going to jump over to our file manager, and I'm going to make sure that I'm in Gary's folder. So I'm going to open up loc.gitsite.gary.com. Now this might be different depending on how you've been following along. And let's go ahead and open up the sites, all modules, custom assets folder. And let's expand the steps folder here and open up the fifth step. Let's also open up the assets.module file. And let's copy the entire code from the fifth step over the code that's in the current assets.module file and save it. Now when we jump back to the command line and we do a git status, we should just see this change here, modified assets.module. Okay, now let's go ahead and commit this. The command I'm using here is git commit, passing it the a parameter to skip staging, and then the message is added step 5 of assets.module, and then I'm just putting in parentheses Gary so it's easy to see in the log. I'm going to hit enter. We went ahead and did the commit. Now let's go ahead and push this up to the remote so we can pull it into our development repository. I'm just going to clear the back scroll and do git push. Now we got some error messages here that said rejected, develop to develop, rejected, master to master, non-fast forward. Failed to push some hrefs. To prevent you from losing history, non-fast forward updates were rejected. Merge the remote changes before pushing again. Now we got this error message in an earlier video when we tried to make a commit that rolled back some of our history. But we also get the message when our local repository isn't up to date. So we need to do a Git Pull before we can do a Git Push. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do Git Pull. Okay, so you may recognize this output here. It shows us that we have a conflict. And the reason we have a conflict is that we made a modification to a piece of code that we hadn't updated yet from our remote. And so when we pulled down those changes, it turned out that some of the changes that we made to our assets.module file were in conflict with the changes that we made in our local revision. So if we look at our assets module, we see the beginning of a conflict here. Here's our left pointing arrows in the name of the initial branch. And then here's our dividing equal signs. And then the right pointing arrows pointing to the second revision, the hashtag of that revision that's in conflict. Now, if we wanted to, we could resolve this like we did our previous conflict by simply modifying this code, selecting the code that we want to add to this version, and then removing all of this metadata here about the conflict, then adding it and committing it. But in terms of looking at the revision history and having it make sense, this isn't the same kind of conflict. What we're looking at here is a non-updated version of our code conflicting with a later version of it. So it might make more sense to roll back our repository, update our repository to make sure that we're up to date with the remote version of the develop branch, and then commit our change. And when we do that, our revision history will be cleaner and a little easier to read because we won't have this fake conflict to resolve. So I'm going to jump to the command line. So what we're going to do, now we're in Gary's development environment here, we're going to reset our repository back before we made our change. And then we're going to pull down the updates that have been made to the develop branch. And once that's done and we're all up to date, we can go ahead and make our change and commit it without the conflict. So let's first take a look at our log to find out what revision we want to roll back to. I'm going to go ahead and do git log one line. Okay, so we have our added steps 5 of assets module here. And then right before we have added step 1 of assets module. Now, if we look at the revision history for our remote, we would see several other commits after this added step 1 of assets module. But for now, this is the one that we want to roll back to locally here. I'm going to hit Q to get out of Vim. I'm going to go ahead and copy this shortened hash, and I'm going to do a git reset hard, and then the shortened hash right here. And I'll hit enter. So now it says we're at that version, and if we look at our log, we'd see that we no longer have our added step 5 of assets module here. So now let's go ahead and pull down the changes from the remote with Git Pull. And now let's look at our log one more time. After our step 1 of assets module, we have several other steps that have gotten added. So now we should be able to go ahead and make our change. So I'm going to go back to my text editor here. I'm going to copy over the 5th step of the assets module again and paste it over the code of assets.module and save it. I'm going to jump back to the command line and do a git status just to make sure that we only have our one change that we're committing here. It looks good. Now let's go ahead and do our commit that we did before. So again, we're doing git commit, passing A to skip staging, and then the message is added step 5 of assets.module with a little signature of Gary. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, we made our commit. Now let's go ahead and do a git push again. All right, so when we look at the output here, it looks like everything went forward okay. So we now have our change.